Water with the dash.
All right, thanks everybody for coming today. We are really happy to have you here. I hate to break off conversation because that, I often say at NERC, like, the agenda is important, but half of NERC, that's only half of NERC's value. It's all the conversation that happens between before and after the meeting that's the most valuable. So I kind of hate to break that off. But I love seeing you guys. We have a diverse group of people here. So if people don't know each other, you're meeting each other. Some of we have some nursing commissioners. We're going to do introductions later. We have some nursing commissioners. We have some civic folks. We have folks that participated in roundtables for this event. We have people from the steering committee for this planning. So great mix of folks, and I'm really glad to be able to be here. There's plenty of food, so don't be shy about getting up at any time and getting more of it. And if this is your first time in the NERC building, it's probably good to know that the women's restroom is right out that door and the men's is right out that door. Or as they say at Disney, you should use this. It's the Disney one. So I'm going to just real quick hand it over to Justin Keel, who is our chair of nursing for this year.
I just want to say thank you all for being here. I'm excited to see what TIP Strategy has to present to us today. NERC and staff and its consultants do a lot of exciting plans, and I'm sure this one will live up to that as well. So thank you all for being here.
Great, thanks, Justin. I'm going to quickly hand it over to TIP, but Jeff and Luke have been engaged in this process from the beginning, and there are other folks from TIP that have been involved, and you get the best and the brightest here in person today. And they have come a long way. So TIP Strategies is based in Austin, Texas, although Jeff is in the Seattle area, so they both came from different parts of the country, and they have crossed vast different distances to bring all the experience of this. So we're glad to have them engaged in this. I'm going to just mention something really quick, because I just realized some of you may not know what NERC is or why you're here. So TIP will do a little bit more on themselves and the project, but let me just give you the real capsule summary. So basically, NERC, Northwestern Indiana Regional Planning Division, is its most fundamental sense is the place where all 41 municipalities in Lake Porter and the Fort counties, and those counties themselves, all come together in this very room where we sit to work on things that are bigger than any one of them. So we are first and foremost the Council of Governments. That's our main structure. But then we have two very important federal designations. Most people know us for the first one I'm going to mention, which is our Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO. That means we are the conduit for federal transportation funds that come to bear on transit, rails, roads, any surface transportation request. And that involves a lot of dollars. That's over $1.5 billion with a B dollars in the next 4 years. That's how much money gets decided right in this room where you sit. So that's our first and foremost kind of bread and butter sort of function. But then just before COVID, after a 10-year painful process, we finally received a designation as an economic development district. That's from the U.S. Economic Development Administration. And the key word for that is eligibility. That meant that this region became eligible for federal economic development funds that the region was not formally eligible. So what I love about it is we have great partners like Northwest Indiana Forum, Heather Ennis, great partners for economic development that we work with all the time. This gives us a particular way to help move that ball forward that doesn't step on anybody else's toes. So it's just an add value to the region. The good part of the impetus for that designation was by the same guys from the region that many of you were involved in that forum. So I want to first and foremost say this is all about partnership and collaboration. And what I love about this is there's nothing duplicative here. This builds on all the work that has already gone on. We're just trying to take it now to the level particularly related to the pandemic. What happened with that designation as an economic development district? Who knew COVID was going to happen? That happened in the fall of 2019. Then COVID came, and all of a sudden what the Economic Development Administration in DC said is that Congress has given us all this money for economic recovery. The first thing we're going to do is give a bunch of money to every economic development district in the country. So that designation, if it had happened a little bit later, we would not be doing this project today. So one of the things that we told the economic development district, that the administration, that we would use those funds for economic development recovery and resiliency plan. So that's where TIP comes in. So it's how do we get out of this pandemic well, and how do we become more resilient in this region so future disruptions, whether they be of another pandemic, a natural disaster, these kind of things. How do we help make Northwest Indiana more resilient to come out of these things even more quickly or to stay buoyant as those things occur? So that's where TIP comes in, and that's what they're going to present on today after the result of many conversations all across this region and a lot of data that they have absorbed. You're going to see capitalized right now. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Allan.
Super, thank you, Ty. Well, good afternoon, everybody. How are you? Excellent. I'm Jeff Marcel. I'm a senior partner with TIP Strategy, joined by Luke Sheffield, who is an associate consultant with our team, and Luke and I are thrilled to be here in person. It's good to be back in Northwest Indiana. It's good to see some familiar faces. I was saying earlier, I feel I've spent so much time in Northwest Indiana, I feel like I'm home again. So it's good to be with all of you. And for those of you that I haven't met in person, I see a lot of faces that I've seen on Zoom screens too. It's good to see real live people again. And so we're thrilled to be here. Luke and I are looking forward to our presentation today, to this conversation that we want to have with you today. But in advance of that, before we speak, I'd love to, if we could just get a sense about who's in the room. You all may know each other really well, but can we ask, and I'm going to ask the gentleman, if you'll start, and I don't know, I've been doing this for a long time. Nobody ever sits in the very front. But that's why I always like to start with the back. Can you introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about your organization and how long you have lived in the Northwest Indiana area?
Sure. So my name is Eric Nelson. I'm the Workforce Development Coordinator for the LaPorte Economic Advancement Partnership, or LEAP. I've just been with them for about 10 months now. It's a brand new position to lead. I'm born and raised in Northwest Indiana. I was born and raised in LaPorte. Went away for school in Illinois, stayed there for a few years. Came back about 3 years ago. Just seeing a lot of changes in our little community of LaPorte, and now it's awesome to be able to be on a team to help continuing that. So
excellent. Yeah. We're going to have a lot of conversation about workforce development today. So I'm glad you're here.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Cynthia Miller. I was born and raised in Gary. I'm a CPA and I have my own business located in Gary, and I've been in business about 8 years. And I definitely didn't want to sit on the front row.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Vanessa Allan Mcleod, President and CEO of the Urban League of Northwest Indiana. We provide services in education, scholarships to graduating high school seniors and returning adult students. We have $1,000 for returning adult students if you stopped out for any reason and you're over 25. We serve Lake Porter and LaPorte County. We also provide financial stability. We have a VITA program, which stands for Volunteer Income Tax Assistance. Anyone that makes less than $56,000 a year, we will process your taxes free of charge, and that's in partnership with NICA. And we also provide diversity and inclusion awareness training to organizations throughout Lake Porter and LaPorte County. In October, we have a large diversity and inclusion awards luncheon where we provide awards to those organizations that promote diversity and inclusion in the workplace and in community. And I've been in my position 12 years. Isn't that something? 12 long years. But I know a lot of people here, and I'm just thankful for the support that we've always had throughout the county.
Thank you, Doctor. We're going to talk a lot about EEI as well, so we're glad you're here.
My name is Anna. I'm with the Lake County Economic Alliance. I've been in the position of Economic Alliance for about 2 years, and I was born and raised in Lake County in Texas.
I'm Andy Mcleod. I'm the Executive Director of the Portage Economic Development Corporation, lifelong Portage resident, and so as always, welcome to Portage.
It's good to see you again.
Hi, I'm Marie Foster Bruce, and I'm the CEO of One Region, and we are a community development sort of organization that works on catalytic projects that are going to drive population growth and crisis in the county. And it's nothing you don't already know, right? And I've grown up in Northwest Indiana, moved out to Texas for a while, and other places, and back. So Wendy and I'm the clerk treasurer for the town of Munster. If you stand in Munster, you can see the house that my parents grew up in, but it was Illinois. So I technically grew up in Illinois. And then I married a Hoosier and have not looked back since. So I've been in here for 30 plus years.
Hi everybody, my name is Pate. I'm the president and CEO of United Way of LaPorte County. I've been with my position for about 10 years. You're probably familiar with United Ways, but we raise money to do impact work in the areas of financial stability, education, and health. And during COVID, we raised $1.5 million just for COVID relief. Got it right back out to the city community in about a year and a half. And so United Ways are just perfectly primed and positioned to do that kind of thing. So it was a great adventure. Can't think of anything else I want to tell you. So, I've been here all my life, except for 6 years at Pittsburgh, same as you, a little time away.
Good afternoon, Tony Rodriguez, born and raised in Camden, Northwest Indiana. Went away to college in New Mexico on a football scholarship. Spent some time out there in the mountains of the Great Southwest. Came back, went to work in economic development in Lake County, specifically Allan. Worked almost 9 years in the mayor's office of economic development. Went to LaPorte County, working in Michigan City, and now at the LaPorte County Community Economic Home. So, Northwest Indiana, born and bred by choice, raising my children here, and we absolutely love the lakefront life and all that goes along with that. So it's an easy area to promote from youth park natural resources. Very sweet.
So hello everybody. A little hoarse, so I apologize. My name is Cynthia Williams, and it's a tough question, but we're trying to answer it, right? I am a Gary native, and after years of working in corporate, I've worked my way back home. And in 2018, launched the Community Development Corporation. Well, it did get formalized. We're official 501c3 as of May 6th of this year. But we've been on the ground. It started initially as an entrepreneurship initiative with the City of Gary, where City of Gary sponsored a program trying to tap into the entrepreneurial pulse of the community. And what we found are a lot of people with a lot of talents, ideas, and abilities to do things, just not the physical space and the resources to do them in. And so it morphed into what is our Community Development Corporation. And so I'm excited to be here. It's even on behalf of the residents of the City of Gary, being able to tap into what's there to help us move our city forward, particularly at this time when there's so much change and so many resources that are made available. So definitely excited to be here in this area.
My name is Michael Van, and I'm a guest of Gary. I was raised in Gary, Indiana. 65, just turned 65 2 weeks ago, and I just recently moved back to the area to be closer to my mom. But for the last 43 years, I was an entrepreneur in New York City, restaurant development, lifestyle, retail development, and I'm very excited to be back to be part of the exciting things going on in Northwest Indiana and help serve in any way I can.
I'm Amy McCormick. I'm the president of Broadband College in St. Joseph. I have been president for 5 years. Just celebrated my 5-year anniversary. We are a comprehensive institution with bachelor programs, graduate programs, and a few degree completion programs. At least 2 alumni in the audience, so it's always exciting if there are more. I love to meet you and hear your stories. I am born and raised in Indiana, but not considered Northwest Indiana, about 2.5 hours south of here. But I've spent most of my career in Chicago, and also lived in Chicago and Oak Park. Bought property in along the lake, beautiful lake, back in 2005, and have been on the lakefront personally, or near the lake, since 2005, but have now moved my professional life and sold on all the property in Illinois. So now I am official in Illinois and going to things like this, and they come in here, and I love our discussion, and I always leave feeling like I live in the best place around, and so it is easy for me to sell. I should also mention Calumet College was the first Hispanic serving institution in the state of Indiana, and we have the highest diversity index in the college in the state of Indiana and the top 10 in the country. So.
Excellent.
Hi, I'm Andrew Harris. I serve on the Crown Point City Council. I also am the Crown Point's representative to the NERC Board. I serve as the chairman or chairperson of the Pedal Committee for NERC. I just recently retired from the banking industry. I was also self-employed in the restaurant industry prior to that. Born and raised in Gary and then Maryville, and then the last several years with the Crown Point.
I'm Eric Nandi. I'm with the Regional Development Company. We administer the SBA's 504 loan program for owner-occupied commercial real estate. And then I also served as board chair of the forum when we brought TIP in to the Ignite the Region plan. So I'm very familiar with these folks and the work they do. So kind of tied for life, I think.
Good afternoon. I'm Heather Ennis. I'm president and CEO of the Northwest Indiana Forum. The forum is the 7-county economic development organization, or the voice of Northwest Indiana business. We market Northwest Indiana as the place to do business, and then we stake out and drive bold initiatives that otherwise wouldn't happen, like the Ignite the Region plan. So we're excited to be working with TIP again. And thank you to Ty and his team and Dennery for leading this effort and getting us on here today.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Trowbridge. I'm the president and CEO of Northwest Indiana's Community Action, and I do like the front row. Outside of that, the organization is fairly large. We service people helping them age in place instead of alternate facility-based care. We help prevent homelessness through housing vouchers and rental assistance and support, and we help financial literacy through lots of different programming in our community. So we actually funnel quite a bit of state and federal dollars for our organization, about $30 million a year, and then that goes out for local providers like Andrew Pierce is on our board, so it's nice to meet you as well. We also do a women, infant, and children program. So economic development, workforce development, all of those are really critical topics that have an effect on students. So it's a good perspective. Born and raised here, left as a young adult for 10 years. I was married to a military person, so New Mexico, Texas, and a little overseas time too. Glad to be back. We have a big family that we're raising in this area, extended family in the area, so seeing what the vision is really important, and being a part of that is really gratifying.
Hi, I'm Dennery King. I'm the Economic Development District Coordinator for NERC. Married a Hammond native, which brought me up here about 30 years ago. Really nice to see some faces and meet you all in person after many phone calls over the last 6 months. So certainly appreciate you all showing up today. Thank you.
Justin Keel, I'm the chairman of NERC this year. I'm also the council president for the town of Lacrosse, and in my day job, I'm the owner and publisher of the regional news for the West Indicator. I've lived in Northwest Indiana, Lacrosse specifically, since 2012.
Great. And I was so happy to see you all that I'm not sure I even told you who I am. So I'm Ty Warner, executive director here at NERC, and although I was born in Ohio on Lake Erie as opposed to Lake Michigan, I grew up for the most part in Sarasota, Florida. So every winter I wonder what I'm doing. But I met my wife came up to college. Met my wife was from the south suburbs, and so I've been here ever since. Most of my career has been over the state line, on the other side of things. But I'm coming into my 10th year at NERC, which is shocking. Feels like 5. I did mention 2 things I just want to do real quick before getting back to Jeff. So I put some handouts on the table that I don't like shoving things at people because you got printed and all that. If you want these, feel free to do an application. This is just a quick and dirty little summary of what NERC is and does. So if you are curious and want to take that, feel free. And then I don't want to confuse planning efforts by any means, but that's what we do here at NERC is we do planning. So we have a now update of our every 4-year fundamentally transportation plan. It's a little broader than that for the region, and we are undergoing it right now, NWI 2050 plus. The last time was 2050, now it's And so if you want to take one of these, summarizes that larger planning process, and there's a QR code on the back where you can take a survey that we would love you to take about the future of Northwest Indiana. It's also got a cool mapping feature where you can drop pins and comment on things that you would like to see in the whole region, which is like so feel free to take that. Again, these things all dovetail, nothing in conflict here, but there's another planning effort that will be done in May of next year. So put that out there. Back to you.
And I know we had someone join us in the back.
All right, I'm Bill Higby. I'm the president of the Porter County Community Foundation. I have been in Porter County my entire life, except for my 4-year sentence in Muncie, where I went to Ball State on a tuba scholarship. But nobody can say that, right?
Awesome. Well, we have what an amazing group of leaders here today. And I think you're going to see when we start to talk about strategies, you're going to start to see some things that resonate with you. You're going to see some things that you think, hey, you know what? My organization does some of that work, and that's done with a purpose. It's intended. What we try to do is compile as many fantastic efforts that are already underway, put a spotlight on them for the rest of the region, so people can really appreciate the great work that's underway. But we have a whole host of strategies, and we'll talk about that. As Ty said, we're going to make this a pretty informal presentation. We've got you till about an hour, 1:30, and I promise we'll get you out on time. But I will also share with you, there's plenty of cookies back there. Thank you, that was a great idea. Please take as many cookies as you like, that way they don't stick around for Luke and myself. But before I dive into the presentation too, I will share with you, the first thing I wanted to do is just recognize the team at Nursing. They have been fantastic to work with. We've worked with them for the last 9 months. You all know Ty as a really passionate and thoughtful leader here in the Northwest Indiana community. I will tell you, he has been incredibly dedicated to this project. Also, you all know Dennery, she has been a driving force behind the development of this planning effort and really committed to getting it right. I want to thank her and recognize her as well. Can we give them a quick round of applause? So let's talk about what we're going to cover today. Today is really, in many ways, a celebration about a ton of work that's been done by leaders all across this region. We're going to cover as many things as we can about what's taken place through the planning process, and then talk to you about the strategies and the actions that have been identified. But we want to make sure you have a sense about all of the great work that's been done by community leaders for the last several months. So let's, just for those of you that may not know who we are, TID Strategies, we're a nationally recognized economic development and workforce development strategic planning firm. We're based out of Austin, Texas. That's where Luke is office. I live in the Seattle, Washington area. Mishka, who was a part of this planning project, is based out of Washington, D.C. But we have folks in Boston, Massachusetts, and in Denver and Michigan as well. So we're really located all across the country. We're a 26-year-old planning firm. And during that 26 years, we've worked with over 350 communities to help them think through plans to grow their local economies or address workforce challenges they have or conduct economic analysis for them. And typically we'll work with cities or counties or regions or states to help them through that process. Just to give you a flavor of some of the projects that we currently have underway, we're in the midst of doing an economic development plan for the city of San Antonio, Texas. We're doing a project for Dallas, Texas as well. Just recently finished a regional economic development strategy in Spokane, Washington, as well as the Indianapolis area. We're in the midst of doing a comprehensive economic development strategy in the Santa Barbara community, in Anchorage, Alaska as well. So we get a chance to work with communities all across the country. And I'm really excited about the work and proud of the work that we did in the Northwest Indiana area, working with this entire community. And let me just by show of hands, how many of you were involved in the Ignite the Region process? Almost everybody. That's fantastic. We're so proud of that work and got so comfortable and familiar with this community. And I was going to ask, Heather, can you share a little bit about some of the, for those of the folks that don't know about some of the recent reports or the recent announcement that was made?
Sure. So the Ignite the Region plan plan and our 5 pillars around that plan. And the end of 2020, we were building a budget around those pillars and how to get things done. We moved 88% of the implementation matrix to in process or complete by the fall of 2020. So we were trying to figure out how to get over those hurdles, and the state legislature came up with a READY program, and we submitted through the partnership for those READY dollars, and we were awarded $50 million. I know many of you have projects around that, so thank you all for the efforts that you've done to help keep Ignite alive, and it's breathing quite well through READY. So.
$50 million, that's not too bad. Huh? I will tell you, all of those communities that I referenced and even more that we work with around the country, we always point to Northwest Indiana as an example of what's possible when a community works together, what can be done. So just congratulations and underscore that. But we've also done work in Fort Wayne, Indiana. You heard me reference Indianapolis as well. So I think we're pretty darn comfortable with the state and are thrilled to be working with NERC on this project. This has been a project team that's been a part of this effort. I'll just quickly introduce you to folks. Alex Cook was the project manager for the Ignite the Region project. Alex is in Anchorage, Alaska today, and sends his regards. He was sad that he couldn't be here with us today. But Alex has been with our team for 20 years now, doing planning work all over the country. Mr. Parkins is a consultant with our team that's been a project manager for this effort as well. And Mishka has worked for the International Economic Development Council. Mishka was one of the authors of that organization's manual on business resiliency and recovery. So, an outstanding professional. Luke Sheffield is an associate consultant with our team, and we could not be more proud of Luke and the work that he has done. In our firm, we call him Mr. Indiana. Because, how many projects?
This is my
fourth project in the state of Indiana. So he's our honorary, but even though he went to Duke. But we're thrilled that Luke's weighed in and been such a contributor on this project. And for me, I was the principal in charge of the Northwest Indiana project, and as I said earlier, thrilled to be back. But I've worked with TIP for the last 8 years, working with communities all over the country. Prior to that, I ran the Economic Development Council in Seattle and King County, and I was their president and CEO. I was with that group for about 10 years. And so that's been the project team that's really been working hand in glove with NERC. Go ahead.
Sorry, before we move on from participants, I forgot to mention Lisa Doherty from the Center for Workforce Innovations. Unfortunately, came down with COVID, so she wanted to participate. So she's looking right through that little camera right there. So I want to turn around and wave to Lisa.
Hi, Lisa.
So I just want to acknowledge that she is tied into this as well.
So I also want to recognize and thank our steering committee members. And I'm going to leave this up for a second. If you are on the steering committee, can you raise your hand? Then let's just give everybody I will tell you, you all are so well represented by leaders in this region. These folks really were outstanding and worked with us really closely over the last several months in developing the analysis and brainstorming and looking at strategies. And so I just want to thank them for their dedication and commitment. They've done an absolutely fantastic job. So let's talk about the project itself. This is the goal of the project, and it's pretty straightforward. It's about, and you heard Ty reference this earlier, this is an Economic Development Administration funded project, and it's about developing an actionable strategies to serve as a path for Northwest Indiana's recovery and a guide to prepare for and a sustained future for economic impacts of pandemics and disasters. So ultimately, this effort's been about taking a targeted analysis and a focused approach to looking at strategies on economic recovery, right? To think about how does the economy come up and out of the pandemic, but also how do we prepare for resiliency? How do we prepare for future impacts, right? As best as we can, right? Nobody knew the pandemic was going to happen, but that's what happens with disasters, right? Or major impacts. You never know what's going to happen, but there are things you can do to try to prepare yourself for anything. So that's part of what we're trying to get accomplished with this plan. I will share with you, this is not an overarching economic development plan like Ignite the Region. It's also not like a local government comprehensive plan. This is really centered in on economic recovery and economic resiliency. And so I just want to frame it in those terms. Let's talk about how we approached it. This is the scope of work that we have for the project. We used our three-phase planning process: discovery, opportunity, and implementation. And the idea is each one of these phases is here to build on top of each other. I won't talk to you about each one of these topics or each one of these tasks, and we'll cover that when we talk a little bit more about the planning process itself. But the idea is in that discovery phase, we compiled as much data as we could. In the opportunity phase, we tried to reach out and talk to as many people in the community as we could. And then coupling those things together, we were able to go to the third phase, and that's when we really start to prioritize specific strategies, things that might resonate with challenges and opportunities we identified, and build out the action document for the plan itself. So that's how the project has gone moving forward. This is the timeline. This has been a 9-month project. We started back in November. Can't believe it, right? It was in November. And we've been working fast and furious, and here we are today, delivering that final presentation. You're also going, I'm going to ask you multiple times to go to review the document that's been put together. We're going to be posting that on the NERC website. In addition to that, you're also going to see a link to some data that Luke is going to share with you in just a moment. And we really encourage you to take the time to go through that as well. I think you'll find it absolutely fascinating. In fact, I know you'll find it absolutely fascinating because of your commitment to this community and how much you care. And with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Luke to talk to you about that data that's been pulled together. So,
Thanks, Jeff. It's great to be here with you all today, especially the steering committee members. It's nice to put, not just faces, but actually see you in mentions. It's great. So as Jeff mentioned, in that discovery process, the first phase of the project, we did a large amount of quantitative data gathering. Our research team worked really hard to pull stuff from a variety of sources. And one of those things that we did was creating what we call the Economic Explorer. Now, this is what the main dashboard looks like, and I apologize, it's probably a little too small text to read all these different indicators that we looked at. Population and demographics, industries and occupations, community patterns, housing, workforce characteristics, and as Jeff did mention, you will be able to actually review this entire file at your leisure. It will be posted on the NERC website pretty soon. We've provided this to them, so you will have the ability yourselves to dive through as much of this as you want. Some people like data more than others, but I know I'm one of those people who like to just dig through and look at all the graphs I can. So we've just pulled out a few that we want to share with you today in the interest of time. I know the steering committee has seen the full breadth of this in the previous meeting, but for our purposes, we're just going to show you a few things we looked at. This one, median household income, I think the big takeaway from this is that Porter County is doing pretty phenomenal. Outpacing the United States and the state of Indiana by a pretty significant margin. But Lake and LaPorte, there's some work to be done in terms of increasing median household income. This one is really interesting. This might be my favorite, but it paints a pretty grim picture of what happened during the pandemic. So this is the annual percent change in employment broken out by the 3 counties, and you'll see the timeline there. In around the 2008-2009, which of course you all know was the Great Recession, there was a really significant dip in employment. And then you'll notice in that 2020 range and leading to 2021, it was either almost identical or even outpacing the employment drop in the labor force from that Great Recession. So like I said, it paints a grim picture and it emphasizes the need for what we're doing today, which is recovering from that pandemic, but also setting up for future shocks. Whether those be, I know Todd was talking earlier in a side conversation about inflation. There are all kinds of supply chain problems. There are disasters that we can't prepare for exactly, but setting up communities like Northwest Indiana to be more resilient. If something like this happens again, God forbid, our hope is that the region will be better prepared. And then finally, this one, again, the colors may make it a little bit difficult to read, but in that commuting patterns section, we looked at not just where people live, but where they work. And this is a pullout directly from Lake County. And you'll see in that top left quadrant box, shows that over 20,000 folks who live in Lake County actually work in Chicago. And we're going to get into bit about sort of the infrastructure things that could really improve those commuting timelines for all those workers who work in Chicago. But you'll see also, you know, to a smaller extent, folks live in Hammond or work in Hammond, folks work in Gary, Maryville, and other places. But I just thought it was very interesting that Chicago is literally the single largest employment municipality for those who live in Lake County. So that's going to be very important. Jeff, do you want to go ahead and lead us through the survey?
Yeah, absolutely. I will share with you, I don't know about you, I'm a big map person, I love maps, and so I would encourage you to go to the data file to filter through it. It's really interactive, and we try to set it up for all 3 counties. And there'll be some interesting things. There'll be some things that you may not have known about. So in about 45 minutes, you can kind of pour through, and there are about 75 different data charts that you can kind of filter through. It's an amazing, powerful tool. I'm really proud of our analytics team for putting this together. This is another tool. So one of the things that we do at TIP, we really care about the data. It's a cornerstone of the planning work that we do. We also really care about what people think, what their opinions are about, what they're seeing on the ground in the communities that we work in. And a big part of this project was doing, a central task was doing an industry survey. And I will tell you, during the pandemic, we've learned this in markets around the country. Communities are really fatigued by surveys. How many of you get surveys on a regular basis? We have found, especially the private sector, they're worn out, right? They're trying to keep their heads above water. But this also points to how really impressed we are and how pleased we are with the turnout of the survey that we received. And I want to thank the steering committee members and specifically the forum for reaching out to the private sector and asking them to participate in this. We got over 100 responses. The survey itself was open for about a month. We had about 20 different questions as a part of that survey. And they were all centered on how these companies managed through the pandemic, through the recovery, what challenges they had, what did they learn from those challenges, what are their areas of need moving forward. And they helped guide our thinking in developing appropriate strategy. And so we wanted to share a few of the questions and some of the responses that we received. This too, I believe, you'll be able to navigate if you want to dig in and learn more about what industry had to say. But there are 2 questions that we thought you might be interested in seeing to start us off. The first is the upper top of the slide references the first question: what were the specific occupations you have difficulty in recruiting? And these are probably no surprise to all of you. Certainly folks who are involved in workforce development, community colleges, that's skilled labor, right? A lot of the technical jobs. And we'll send out, I promise you, after today, we'll send out this presentation so you don't have to worry about capturing it unless you want to capture it. But we're happy to share, we will share this with you. But then the second question that we asked from the lower half of the screen is skills your organization is having difficulty in finding. And these are probably no surprise either. A lot of them are technical skills, right? Software programming, mechanical experience, equipment operations, those type of things. But then we also see some things related to characteristics, right? Professionalism, you see motivation, persistence, those kinds of things. And that's probably not a surprise to folks, but it's certainly on the minds of the companies that we spoke with. This is another one that I thought was of interest. We asked the question, what are the most important issues Northwest Indiana faces as the economy recovers? I won't go through every one of them, but I'll share the top ones with you. Certainly a skilled workforce. We just heard that, right, from the 2 questions previously. That's on everybody's mind. And that's been the case around the country for the last several years. But then the other one, protecting this health and safety, both of employees but also customers. And you remember in the depth of the pandemic, companies really struggled with figuring out how to stay open and how to operate, right? Everybody was trying to figure through how to deal with PPE and following all of the guidelines and rules. And then in addition to that, strengthening collaboration and unity in this community. I thought that was a really interesting reference, especially from the private sector. And then the other one that we've seen on a consistent basis was expanding the access to child care. That's a big issue. We'll talk more and more about it as the day goes forward. The next question that we had was centered on what are the most critical activities related to economic development that the community should move forward on for resiliency. And the ones that bubble to the top were enhancing critical infrastructure. And I know that is near and dear to NERC's heart, and then all of you, right? Infrastructure is the backbone of local economy. Then supporting existing industry is absolutely imperative in their minds, and then expanding talent development, giving back to that priority related to workforce development. And then the last question I'll share with you, this is really two questions. We asked folks, what do they think about, in a word or two, what do they think about the local economy today, and what do they think the vision for the economy should be in 10 years? And you'll see the today is referenced in blue. And you'll see some things growing, right? But you'll also see some references to functional, stagnant, backward. Some of those kinds of things. I got a kick out of seeing snowy. So that tells you when that person was filling the survey out. But then we look at in 10 years, right? Growing is very clear. Resilient, diverse. These are all references I thought that spoke to the conversations that we had at the steering committee and probably resonate with you as well. So that is what we've done with the survey. We actually did a tremendous amount of outreach as well in having roundtables, one-on-one interviews. So of course we did our survey. We had our steering committee meet multiple times to have a lot of really substantive conversations about recovery and resilience. But we also did a whole series of roundtables on all of these different topics. I want to thank the folks at One Region for your willingness to bring your leadership together. But we also spoke to economic developers and public officials and folks in natural resources, real estate folks, also higher education and workforce development groups, so a whole wide range, nonprofit leaders as well, and learned a tremendous amount. We were speaking about this earlier. I want to say we hovered somewhere around 175 people participated in the roundtables and the one-on-one interviews that we had and conversations with key players. And we learned a tremendous amount during those discussions, as I said. All of that data married with what we heard from folks helped us pull together our SWOT analysis. And you all have had this, you've done enough planning where you know what a SWOT analysis is, right? It's about understanding the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in the community. We like to look at a SWOT as it relates to its application or implications at the local level, the state level, national, and global, just so that we can kind of frame it in our own minds. And we work with our steering committee to refine this. I do want to share with you, this is not intended to be exhaustive. Frankly, we just were looking for a way to kind of compile all of the information we learned and use that as a guide. So it's not this isn't a scientific analysis or a statistical analysis. This was just your professional consultants and the steering committee coming together and saying, okay, from everything we learned, let's put our ideas together and allow us to capture priorities in the community. And that's what we did. And these are the strengths that we have identified. And I'm not going to go through every one just because we don't have enough time today, but we can talk about these later if you like. But I'll highlight just a few. One of the great strengths is the quality of life. I heard this from multiple people in the introductions today. And you're absolutely spot on. This is an amazing place to live and invest your future and raise a family. Higher educational institutions are just the bedrock, one of the strongest assets. Transportation and logistics, right? The infrastructure that you have, the logistical base that you have here is an incredible strength. Proximity to the Chicago market and the size of that market. The water capacity that you have here, the available land that you have here. All these are all big strengths in this community. Let's talk a little bit about weaknesses. You heard from Luke, and you'll see this in the data that we pulled together, and we've had this conversation in this community for quite some time. The population growth has just barely creeped along and hasn't kept pace. Limited housing options, child care access, broadband infrastructure in some areas. We had so many meetings with Ty where he had to join us from a coffee shop because he didn't have the kind of broadband service he needed at his home. So, those are all things that we're thinking about. But let's talk about opportunities. And you can see how many opportunities are clustered around this local and regional area. And I'll just reference a few. rail line expansion is an amazing opportunity. You all know that. That's been on top of folks' mind for a long time. But we just felt like what an incredible opportunity to continue to leverage. The industry and workforce development collaboration opportunity is absolutely right. And we've heard that from industry. The Midwest Quantum Corridor is another area that opportunity that we love. Talent retention and talent development is another fruitful area, and then industry diversification. But as you can see, there's a ton of opportunities. The remote workers to, across the board, great opportunities in this community. And the threats, I won't spend a lot of time on this because a lot of times when we think about threats, there are things that aren't necessarily in your control. But we want to make sure that we have an appreciation of so that we can prepare. And those are things like natural disasters, and of course, right, the pandemic. But then we think about a potential recession, right? What impact that might play, supply chain challenges, trade policies, all of those things kind of hover in the back of our minds as we go through the planning process. So that's a lot of the thinking that we had to form the foundation of the development of the plan that we're going to share with you right now. So with that, let's talk about the action plan itself. One of the things that we've done to develop this plan was we worked with the steering committee to create a set of guiding principles. And when I think about guiding principles, what we're talking about here is really values or commitments of this community. And the four values or the four commitments are centered on sustainability, collaboration, equity, and forward thinking. And so when we put the plan together with our steering committee, we all committed, it was on the top of our minds to be committed to sustainability, and I'm talking about economic sustainability, right? People use that word in a lot of different ways. We're talking about economic sustainability. And then we also have made a commitment to being collaborative, and we value equity to ensure that recovery and resilience efforts include all populations in underserved areas of the region. That was absolutely significant. And then being as forward-thinking as possible, right, to plan for any potential economic shocks and with a long-term focus. And so these are the guiding principles, the values that carried us forward through the planning process. And these are the goals that we identified as a part of the plan. We established these goals with our steering committee and used them as a framework to hang the strategies and the actions you'll see in just a moment. Talent, infrastructure, talent, workforce, and business vitality, right? You heard me reference those things multiple times when we talk about the stakeholder engagement work that was done. So today you're going to hear in just a moment that strategies and supporting actions that are identified in the plan, as I said earlier, many of these things are already being done, and we know that, but you'll see recommendations from us about expanding some of those things, putting a bigger spotlight on things, providing greater support to some of those things, but then there'll also be some strategies we've identified that are brand new and we need new support, and of course a champion to help carry those things forward. Luke will take you through the strategies here in just a moment. There are about 16 of them with 52 actions associated with each one. I promise you we're not going to take you through all 52. I will encourage you once again to go back to the document if you would, because what we are going to ask you to do is go and look at that and say, hey, you know what, my group or me as a leader in this community, I'm excited about that action, and I'd love to see where I can be involved and participate. And that's part of what we want to get accomplished today. So with that, let me turn it over to Luke, and he can take you through those.
All right, thank you, Jeff. And as he said, we're not going to go really into the weeds and get through every single one of these strategies. We'll talk about the top level strategies and get into some examples of some strategies and actions. But when you have the chance to look at that document, you'll be able to read it all at your leisure. I just want to give you sort of a high level overview of what we're thinking with these three goals, and then some examples of some smaller level tactics. So we're going to go in order here. The first one is infrastructure. And again, as Jeff said, some of these are ongoing projects, and others may have been brought up in Ignite the Region, but I think the key word here are uses momentum, right? It's not enough to simply propose projects or even apply for grant funding for projects and then not see them through, right? You really got to keep your foot on the pedal, on the gas, and accelerate. So one of those that I know Heather at the forum was involved with applying for the Ready Midwest Farm Corridor. Now this is really an Industry 4.0 forward-looking project to expand a fiber network across 156 miles from Illinois all the way through northern Indiana. So it does include 7 counties that are touched in northern Indiana, but those within that are the 3 counties of Lake, Porter, and LaPorte. It's going to be connected to certain hubs. So there's the Digital Crossroads Data Center in Hammond is one of the prominent ones. But really in terms of maximizing this development and creating a more diverse and vibrant industry surrounding it is really going to be the key here. It's not enough to simply build it and say, oh, well, there it is. You really need to broaden the consortium and coalition of parties that are involved with this project. So obviously the city of Chicago is one, but then there are higher education institutions like Purdue Northwest that could really benefit from this. Because along this Midwest Farm Corridor, there's going to be an opportunity for industry to be built up around it. So things like data centers, finance, research and development, again, with higher education. So those sorts of things are going to be necessary and beneficial to the region. And then, of course, things like doing an economic impact study would be a tactic under this. So not simply being content to rest on your laurels and say, okay, now it's done, or it will be done in 10 years, but saying, okay, how is it really going to tangibly impact the economy? The second one, improve broadband access, particularly in rural areas. As Jeff kind of quips, Ty has been joining us virtually from coffee shops because his house doesn't have high-speed internet. And this is a critical thing that we saw during the pandemic, that remote work and remote learning were more important than ever before. If you live in a rural area where you don't have access to reliable broadband internet, you're going to be vastly behind your peers in other communities. So expanding that, improving it. There are certain funding sources available. So there was the Next Level Connections program championed by Oprah at the state level. There are things like the Broadband Ready Communities database that can be better utilized to map areas that have this access. And we think setting goals is important as well. So a goal that we've come up with in the plan is 90% broadband coverage at what the FCC has stated as the minimum standard of broadband, which is 25 megabit downloads, 3 megabit uploads. But expanding that and being more ambitious and saying, okay, in 10 years, let's try to hit 50% coverage at gigabit fiber speed, which for urban centers, in many cases, is already being expanded and developed, but again, in those rural areas, they need more work. The third one, complete the Greater South Shore double track through the railroad expansion. So again, similar to the Midwest Farm Corridor, it's not about the simple basic infrastructure itself, but what you build around it. And really the branding of this project needs to be amped up. There's limited awareness in parts of the region of what this is really going to mean. As you saw in the data, Chicago, the proximity to Chicago is huge. And if this project is completed and optimized, it's going to cut down commuting times significantly for folks who want to go from Lake, Hilton, Porter, and LaPorte counties into Chicago. And so it's also going to involve collaboration with something called the West Lake Corridor Project, which is primarily in Lake County, but deals more with things like wetland mitigation and environmental impacts. So connecting those two projects together, information sharing, establishment of common goals is going to be really important. Public transportation. So again, similar to broadband, connecting those rural and urban centers is really important, but there are also more innovative things you can do around things like shared mobility in city centers. So if we're talking about Gary or Hammond, and this can be a little bit of a controversial thing for some communities, but we think it's important to note at least, which is those shared electric scooters, shared bikes, those kinds of programs. This has been done in other places. So for instance, San Francisco, which is certainly an aspirational community for you all, but they have a really easy to use website that maps all the different services and gives you information about them. But then also the trails. I can't remember who it was, but we do have a representative who's deeply involved in the trail system, particularly along the Lake Michigan shoreline. So connecting those various communities, the Marquette Greenways and Blueways plan that came out in 2020 did identify some gaps. So we believe those gaps need to be filled sooner rather than later. various communities by walking and by biking along those trails. And then lastly, expanding these shovel-ready sites for various different types of real estate development. A really big part of this is utilities. So the electric utilities, the water and wastewater management. It doesn't really help if you have land if it's not land that's shovel-ready, right? If the utilities don't stretch there, it's just not going to work. So there, just by way of anecdotal example, the city of Highland and the town of Griffith recently did a sort of regionally collaborative initiative where they're going to be sending a far higher amount of their wastewater to Hammond to be treated, because it's going to involve a lot of money and a lot of effort, but those sorts of utilities-based infrastructure things are critical to real estate development. But there are also things you can do about making permitting online fast-tracked and more accessible to folks. Just by way of example, Louisville, Kentucky has a really great online permitting portal that's really streamlined. When you're thinking about how this real estate development gets kicked off, a big part of it is just sort of bureaucracy and paperwork and having to apply for commercial permits and all that.
And I will share with you all, those involved in Ignite know, well, hey, hold on, I've heard that before. That's because we made that recommendation in Ignite. And not only that, we used another example, not the one that Luke just referenced. So I share that with you because we thought, hey, look, here's another, just want to mention it one more time, here's another community that's implementing this that is successful and work, and we encourage you to do it. So,
thanks, Jeff. And also, the last thing I'll mention about this real estate development point, there is a really, really large amount of privately owned square footage, particularly in Lake County, estimated between 1 and 3 million square feet. So working with brokers and developers to really investigate the best use cases for that land is going to be really important. So I'm going to move on to the second goal, which is talent and workforce. And again, we have so many folks here today who are very knowledgeable and have helped via the steering committee and roundtables to go through this kind of thing. So that first one, retain more graduates of post-secondary institutions. So we actually have a few folks in the room today who grew up in the Northwest Indiana region or maybe adjacent to it and left for college, but then came back, right? So there are two things here. One, ideally you would like them to stay within the region and go to a place like Purdue Northwest or Calumet or all those places. But even if you have a prior resident who maybe his family was here and moved away for college, we call them boomerangs, right? Retaining those post-secondary graduates, bringing them back to the community is really important. And there are communities like Greensboro has done a great job at this, really tracking these boomerangs and providing ambassador programs to reach out to these folks and say, hey, it's great for you, you should come back. There are also, leadership development and community connections that need to be made. We have a lot of folks here with community foundations. If you really work with young professionals and recent grads and saying, here's how you could get involved in your community, that can have a big impact. And then even things like incentives for staying or relocating to the region for recent graduates, whether it's remote working incentives, or even things that are certain innovative things you can do with loan debt relief by saying if you agree and are a resident for a certain number of years, maybe 3 or 5 years, you get a $5,000 loan debt relief. And then the second point, align workforce training with employer needs through apprenticeships and credentialing. So I'm sure you're all aware, this is no surprise that 4-year degrees, while still highly impactful on your eventual earnings, are not everything. And some students, whether or not they're prepared, some just don't really feel interested in a 4-year degree, or it's too expensive. So certain options, I think I was speaking about this with Eric before, on-the-job training and apprenticeships for folks right out of high school to be exposed to the opportunities in heavy industry, various, whether it's tourism, hospitality, things that they can do that don't require a 4-year degree. As well as, so as Jeff mentioned, one of our guiding principles here is equity. And so we believe that there needs to be, both in 2.2 and 2.3, there needs to be a particular focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. The targeting of both women and Black, Indigenous people of color, BIPOC, and other minority groups need to be a particular focus of these efforts because they are disparately impacted by things like the pandemic, but also just in general. So those high demand occupations, as Jeff mentioned, we did an employer survey, and they identified the occupations that they have the hardest time filling. We think that needs to be at a minimum on an annual basis, and ideally even more than the 100+ responses that we got. That sort of survey needs to be updated regularly. You need to know what these high demand occupations are, and then also including things like wraparound services. Pittsburgh is a community that's doing something really interesting there. 2.4, collaboration among workforce development service providers. Again, I wish Lisa was here with us today. We have some other folks involved in workforce development. And we think that the Center for Workforce Innovation should really serve as the convener for this. These different service providers, while they're all doing very important work, they can't be siloed at times. We think that collaboration needs to increase. And then finally, attracting, we talked about growing your own, we talked about boomerangs, but attracting skilled talent from outside the region to fill the gaps that you have. So one example here is Hello West Michigan. They have a really great online initiative, employer-driven to attract folks. So having a really clear and consistent voice as a region for talent attraction and a regional messaging strategy.
Let me share a little bit more about our thoughts about talent attraction. In the world of economic development that we're seeing around the country, that's more important now, or just as important as attracting industry. Right? For years, when I was going through economic development, and when I was a practitioner in Texas or in the Seattle area, all I spent my time doing was trying to talk to companies about why they should invest in my community, and going out and marketing and doing those. And that stuff is critical. It's really important to diversifying the economy. We'll talk about that. But now the fight for talent is just as right. It's about keeping your talent. You have amazing educational institutions, and so you have this reoccurring crop of fantastic young people. And trying to keep them local is essential. Right? We're based in Austin, Texas. Everybody wants to take credit for the success in Austin, the economic success. The truth is, it comes from the University of Texas. Because anybody who went to UT had a good time, and they go, hey, how can I stick around here? That's the kind of connection you want to make sure to have for folks who went to school here. But for those folks who've never been here in their lives, this is an amazing place. And it's not just the North Shore, it's all of this communities. And there's so many attractions, but trying to communicate that to individuals. And this Hello West Michigan project is based out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. We had a chance to do some strategic planning with them. They have this outstanding program funded by the private sector, focused in on marketing and branding to individuals, right? They're very defined in terms of the market that they communicate to. They don't try to broadcast to the entire country. But they also work with private sector folks to try to do matchmaking. And they do, it's way beyond just having a jobs board, right? They try to do matchmaking with people that they have in their catalogs. They work with alumni associations to try to bring people back. But the other thing they do is they do an outstanding job of hosting events every so often. They have a massive event that takes place the night before Thanksgiving. And everybody that's come back in to visit their families, because they grew up there, they hold a big party for the community and invite as many people as they can the night before Thanksgiving. For all those folks who are coming back in to visit with their parents. And so those are the kinds of things that we would encourage you. And those are really tangible, measurable things that could be done.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly say, you may be wondering a little bit, how does this connect to economic resiliency, right? Well, similar to the infrastructure thing, building out the industry around those different infrastructure projects, with talent, the connection to resiliency is industry and talent diversification, right? If you're too reliant on a particular occupation or labor force subgroup, you're not going to be successful when economic disruptions hit, right? If you're really basing a large portion of your economy on purely hospitality workers and not upskilling and reskilling them for jobs in the future, you're going to have a difficult time when disruptions hit. So I know we're running short on time, but I'll go through business vitality as well. The first one, strengthening the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So I know that that's been a big part of the forum, and one region have really worked hard on that. The Biz Hub number 2, so this was a byproduct partially of Ignite. There are foundations and Small Business Development Center and the Center for Workforce Innovation that are doing this, but there's not as much awareness about it. There are really awareness campaigns needs to be done. And then also mentorship programs. So we mentioned ambassadors for the in the talent and workforce section, but in business vitality, there needs to be a mentorship program for small business owners and pursuing additional sustainable funding. 3.3, educating business owners on how to build a resilient business and better prepare for future disruptions. There needs to be a coordinated and clear worksheet for small business owners to prepare for things like this. And there wasn't really in this case. A lot of times the education aspect was missing. And we think that doing a series of workshops, things like that would be really helpful. As well as post-disaster financing options, whether that's revolving loans, and things like that, or direct financial assistance. Jeff?
Yeah, the only thing I would add here too is one of the most amazing conversations that we had in the 9 months of this project was with the roundtable that we spoke with, focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we spoke with a large number of small minority-owned businesses and listened to what those leaders went through to keep their companies alive, their businesses alive during the pandemic. And for a lot of them, they weren't ready to access the kinds of dollars and federal programs that were available out there because there were some things that they were busy running their business, right? Not compiling paperwork or documentation that a lot of, I think, bigger companies were ready to do. And they were able to, those bigger companies were able to tap into some of the financing programs, whereas some of the smaller companies just weren't. And that made it doubly hard to keep their heads above water throughout this entire pandemic. And so working closely to help make sure that all companies, all businesses, especially the small ones that don't have those kinds of resources, have availability and work closely with organizations around this region to make sure they're ready to go if something bad happens in the future. We think that was a big lesson coming out of that conversation.
And then briefly, 3.4 programs and supports that serve targeted populations of business owners. Again, this is an equity issue. Women and minority-owned businesses have particular needs that are not currently being met in a lot of cases in the region, but we also see that at the national level. So we believe things like expanding the Minority Business Skills Enhancement Program could be really critical. We've talked about 3.5 briefly throughout this presentation, but childcare is a hugely important issue when it comes to business vitality. And we believe that employers need to be more engaged in things like this. We've seen examples in other communities of large and even medium employers actually providing their own on-site childcare services. But you can also do things like negotiating special rates with local childcare support services. So if an employer comes and says, hey, I have 20 employees who require childcare, I'll send them all to you if you give us a discounted rate, that kind of thing. So there's creative stuff you can do there. And then lastly, the business retention and expansion, but as well, attraction as well, is obviously really important. Focusing on those targeted occupations and those targeted skills, but also setting up things like revolving loan programs, and coming out with one-pagers, sort of like landing pages for businesses that are considering relocating or expanding. So I think, I know I went through that quickly, but I wanted to make sure we leave some time for next steps in Q&A.
Super, thank you. And so you're probably thinking to yourself, holy smokes, they went through 52 different actions, right? They talked about 16 different strategies. How's that all going to happen? Well, one thing I would do is I'll point you to a model that I referenced earlier, right? Ignite the Region really has done an outstanding job kind of cataloging and capturing strategic planning work, regional strategic planning work that keeps moving forward. We think the same cadence, the same type of model works here. In fact, actually, we would encourage kind of a leveraging off of some of that group that's already being meeting regularly and moving that regional effort forward. But I will share with you tomorrow, we're meeting with our steering committee. And I believe that means, if you heard something that you really were excited about and passionate about today, we would welcome you to join us tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock here, same room. And we're going to have a conversation with our steering committee and talk about priorities. What are the strategies, what are the actions that are the lowest hanging fruit? What are the things that are the biggest priority? We'll start to catalog those things. We'll also talk about what organizations and leaders should be taking on some of this work. We'll also be talking about who's not in the room that should be a part of the effort. And so we'll be trying to capture that as we move forward tomorrow as well. And then we'll start to talk about what does an implementation framework look like, right? How do you continue the momentum that's been built? How do you bring people back together on a recurring basis to capture efforts that have been moving? So we're going to have that conversation tomorrow. One of the tools that we use as a part of this is an implementation matrix. Really, it's a spreadsheet on steroids, right? Where we just capture all the strategies and actions, but then start to have categories of assignments and timelines and priorities and metrics associated. So it becomes this tool that is used day in and day out as organizations are kind of moving forward with the work. So that's what the next steps are. I would really encourage you to review the plan. There's a ton of data, a lot of appendix material, but the plan itself is not too bad. It's what, 25 pages, so it's not that. We try to pride ourselves on writing things that are readable. Our charts are, I think, engaging. We have a graphic designer that is really proud of her work as well. We're proud of it. So I would encourage you to take some time to go through it, take a look at the data as well, but find it, see if there's a place for you, see if there's something that really gets you excited, and then connecting in with Jerry and Ty and saying, hey, you know what, I want to be involved in this in some way, shape, or form. Let's talk about how that happens. We move forward. So, covered a lot. We're right at time. I promise Luke and I will stick around and respond to any questions that you have, so please go ahead.
I have a conflict in the morning, but will you send this PowerPoint out like now, yesterday, tonight, so I can look at it, and then maybe I could send you some areas that I think the urban league, definitely should be a part of. Okay.
I put my cards around the table, so feel free to communicate with me on it.
Yeah, we'll make sure.
Yeah.
We'll make sure.
And I'll get it to you like midnight tonight. You don't stay up 24 hours tonight.
And thank you for that, because I will be honest, that's exactly the kind of enthusiasm that makes these kinds of things come to life. We do consulting work everywhere, and if this is just the TIP strategies plan, not a lot's going to happen. This is your plan, so yeah.
Well, just speaking of enthusiasm, so I'm taking pictures of these slides because late last night and very early this morning, I read a multi-million-dollar grant proposal that we're putting in on Wednesday, and I'm wondering if I can refer, is this final enough that I could refer to many of, and it would be public, and it's around really post-baccalaureate programs that meet critical needs for our region, and addressing some of the real underrepresented groups and building equity. So it aligns so much with many of the things that you just said there. So if I could reference this.
You see me shaking my head, yes, but it's high product. It's not much.
We'll be going a little bit more down and dirty with the implementation with the steering committee tomorrow morning for
And maybe I can find a summary, or maybe you can do a letter of support just saying that this is, very complimentary or consistent with all the work that Mercy has done.
Sure. Other questions while we're here? There's still plenty of cookies left. Any other questions that you have for the time being? If there's something that strikes you later on, if there's something that pops in your head, or you read through the document, you're like, gosh, I'm not really sure what they talked about there. Luke would love an opportunity to talk to you. I would be happy to talk with you. I know Ty and Henry would love to talk to you as well. So feel free. We'll make sure everybody's got our contact information. Thank you all for joining us today. We're really excited about this effort. Hope you are too. So thank you.
Thank you all so much.